The Cosmic Council's evaluation chamber stretched across 17 kilometers of polished obsidian flooring, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into darkness above. Bioluminescent crystals from the Valerian homeworld cast shifting patterns of blue and gold light across the assembled delegates, each representing civilizations that had mastered the stars for millennia. Ambassador Zexthera of the Valerian Empire stood at the central podium, her crystalline exoskeleton refracting the chamber's light into prismatic rainbows. Her 4 arms moved with practiced precision as she manipulated the holographic displays that floated before her. 3 cycles of the most comprehensive species assessment in galactic history. Honored delegates. Her voice resonated through bioacoustic translators in 47 different languages. We gather today to conclude the great cataloging. Every sentient species within our sphere of influence has been measured, tested, and evaluated according to our established parameters. The massive displays shifted, showing species after species in order of their assessed capabilities. At the apex stood the expected champions of galactic civilization. The Krillian hegemony held the crown for raw physical prowess. Their warriors, evolved on a world with gravity 3 times galactic standard, possessed bone density that rendered them nearly indestructible. General Vashtar himself, present in the chamber, stood 4 meters tall with natural armor plating that could deflect plasma bolts. His species could crush starship hulls with their bare claws, survive in hard vacuum for hours, and regenerate limbs within days. Physical dominance rating, 9.7 out of 10. Zexthera announced as images of Krillian warriors demolishing battle mechs played overhead. The ethereal collective claimed the psychic supremacy. High Psion Merthala, existing as pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, projected waves of controlled telepathic force that made lesser beings' minds quiver. Her people could move asteroids with concentrated thought, communicate across star systems instantaneously, and peer into the quantum foam of reality itself. Psychic capability rating, 9.9 out of 10. The Zenithari Federation dominated technological advancement. Science Director Kelnash, a fusion of organic neural tissue and quantum processors, represented a species that had transcended biological limitations centuries ago. Their cities existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, their computers operated faster than light itself, and they had learned to manipulate the fundamental constants of physics. Technological sophistication rating, 9.8 out of 10. Species after species followed, the Aquarian depths with their mastery of biotechnology, the Void Walkers with their ability to phase through solid matter, the temporal architects who could perceive multiple timelines simultaneously. Each had carved their niche in the galactic hierarchy through measurable, quantifiable superiority. And then the displays shifted to the final entry. A collective ripple of amusement passed through the chamber as images of the newest discovery filled the air. Bipedal creatures with soft, pink skin. No natural armor, no psychic emanations, no technological marvels that defied physics. They looked almost comically fragile compared to the giants and energy beings surrounding them. Species designation. Human, Zexthera announced, her tone carrying the subtle condescension reserved for disappointing results. Origin, single planet, 3rd orbit of an unremarkable yellow star in the outer spiral arm. Discovery date, 53 cycles ago. The data cascaded across the displays in stark, unforgiving numbers. Physical strength assessment, 2.1 out of 10, below galactic average in every category. Bone density insufficient for most industrial applications. Muscle fiber composition adequate only for their home gravity well. No natural weapons, armor, or defensive adaptations. Delegate Thorax of the Insectoid Confederation clicked his mandibles in amusement. His own species rated 7.3 in physical capability, and they were considered among the weaker military powers. Psychic potential evaluation, 0.3 out of 10, essentially negligible. No detectable telepathic ability, no telekinetic capability, no extrasensory perception beyond primitive intuition. Their minds appear to be completely isolated from the quantum consciousness field. High Psion Merthala's energy form flickered with what might have been pity. Even the lowly swamp crawlers of Mutar rated 2.1 in psychic ability. Technological development rating, 1.7 out of 10. Primitive by any galactic standard. Still utilizing chemical combustion for space travel, electromagnetic radiation for communication, and silicon-based computation systems that require physical components. No mastery of quantum mechanics, dimensional manipulation, or consciousness transfer. The Zenithari's processors hummed with calculation algorithms that sounded suspiciously like mechanical laughter. Lifespan analysis. Severely limited at approximately 80 local years. Biological aging appears irreversible, leading to system failures that their primitive medicine cannot address. No evidence of consciousness preservation or transfer capabilities. Environmental adaptation, minimal. Require specific atmospheric composition, temperature ranges, and pressure levels for survival. Cannot function in hard vacuum, high radiation, or most planetary environments without artificial life support. Zexthera paused, allowing the full weight of humanity's inadequacy to settle over the chamber. Additional notable deficiencies include absence of natural toxin resistance, inability to regenerate lost limbs, susceptibility to most galactic pathogens, and remarkable fragility when subjected to standard industrial processes. The laughter was open now. Chittering, harmonious, mechanical, and telepathic amusement echoing from species to species. In a galaxy where the average sapient being could survive plasma fire, manipulate matter with their minds, or process information at quantum speeds, humans appeared to be little more than an evolutionary curiosity. Summary assessment. Zexthera continued, humans represent the lowest-rated sentient species ever encountered. By every measurable standard, physical capability, mental prowess, technological advancement, environmental adaptation, and survival potential, they rank in the bottom percentile of galactic civilization. She gestured, and the final recommendation appeared in glowing text above the assembly. Proposed classification: protected species, category Omega. Recommended for preservation in controlled environments. Suitable for cultural study and genetic diversity maintenance. No military applications. No industrial applications. No strategic value to galactic civilization. The vote was a formality. Delegate after delegate registered their approval, each more amused than the last at the idea of these soft, weak, short-lived creatures trying to compete in a galaxy of titans. Motion carries unanimously, Zexthera announced. Humanity is hereby classified as a protected species, to be maintained in preserves for the educational benefit of superior civilizations. As the chamber began to empty, filled with the satisfied murmur of a job well done, none of the delegates noticed the small human observation team in the visitors' gallery. Captain Elena Rodriguez and her crew sat in silence, watching the beings who had just relegated their entire species to the status of cosmic pets. Elena's expression remained neutral, professional, but Lieutenant Commander Park, sitting beside her, noticed her hands clenched into fists. "Captain," he whispered. Elena's voice was barely audible, but there was something in it that made her crew lean closer. "They measured everything they could think of, didn't they?" "Yes, ma'am. Everything except the one thing that actually matters." "Which is?" Elena's smile held no warmth at all. "What happens when you tell a human they can't do something?" The assessment was complete. The measurements were final. The galaxy's hierarchy was established. None of them had any idea what they had just unleashed. The ESS Endeavour hung in the void like a testament to human stubbornness. A patchwork of salvaged alien technology held together by Earth's steel, determination, and what the engineering crew cheerfully called aggressive improvisation. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of humanity's first interstellar vessel, watching the massive Valerian diplomatic cruiser approach through the viewscreen. The alien ship dwarfed the Endeavour by several orders of magnitude. Its crystalline hull caught starlight and refracted it into patterns that hurt to look at directly, while energy fields visible to the naked eye rippled across its surface like aurora. It was a casual display of technological superiority that made humanity's greatest achievement look like a rowboat approaching a battleship. "Incoming transmission, Captain," reported Communications Officer Maria Santos. her fingers dancing across a control panel that looked like it had been assembled by particularly creative vandals. Half the interfaces were human-made, jury-rigged to work with alien systems that had never been designed for organic interaction. On screen, the holographic projection of Ambassador Zexthera materialized in the center of the bridge, her 4-meter-tall crystalline form somehow managing to look both elegant and condescending. The translation matrix took a moment to calibrate, producing a brief cacophony of harmonic tones before resolving into perfect English. Captain Rodriguez. The ambassador's voice carried the sort of patient tone usually reserved for addressing small children or particularly slow pets. I trust you have reviewed the Cosmic Council's decision regarding your species classification? Elena's expression remained professionally neutral, though Lieutenant Commander Jackson Park, her first officer, noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. Around the cramped bridge. Cramped by necessity, not choice, since every cubic meter had been packed with salvage technology. Her crew exchanged carefully controlled glances. We have Ambassador, a protected species classification. Elena's voice was level, giving nothing away. Category Omega, if I recall correctly. Indeed, please understand, this designation is for your own protection. The galaxy can be extraordinarily dangerous for less capable species. Zexthera's form shifted slightly, light patterns dancing across her surface in what the cultural briefings had identified as a gesture of benevolent superiority. We will establish appropriate reserves for your people. Comfortable habitats where you can maintain your cultural practices without the stresses of competitive interstellar civilization. Reserves, Park repeated quietly, his engineering background making him particularly good at reading between diplomatic lines. Like wildlife preserves? A crude but not entirely inaccurate analogy, Zexthera acknowledged without apparent embarrassment. Many species find great fulfillment in such arrangements. The Mutarian collective, for instance, has been quite content in their designated sectors for the past 4 centuries. They produce the most exquisite poetry about their swamp habitats. Elena stepped forward, her soft-soled boots silent on the bridge's composite flooring. She was not particularly tall, barely 1.7 meters in a galaxy where the average sapient being stood over 2 meters, and her simple blue uniform lacked the intimidating presence of Krillian battle armor or the otherworldly energy patterns of ethereal robes. But something in the way she moved made the cramped bridge seem smaller, more focused. And our formal request to join the galactic community as equal partners? I'm afraid that's quite impossible, Captain. Zexthera's harmonic voice carried what might have been genuine regret. Your species simply lacks the necessary capabilities for meaningful participation in galactic affairs. We've conducted the most comprehensive assessment in Council history: physical strength, psychic potential, technological advancement, environmental adaptation, intellectual capacity. By every relevant metric, humans rank in the bottom percentile of known sapient life. Every metric, Elena repeated, and Park recognized the particular tone that usually preceded his captain doing something that would either be brilliant or get them all killed. Every scientifically relevant measurement, yes. Please don't take this as a criticism. Many species serve vital roles without being warriors, scholars, or leaders. The Piltharian slug beings, for example, have revolutionized waste management across 17 sectors. The crystalline chorus provides background harmonics for diplomatic ceremonies. Even the void leeches serve as excellent portable lighting in low-energy environments. Engineering Chief Thompson looked up from his constantly sparking console, his weathered face showing the sort of expression that suggested he was calculating exactly how many ways the ambassador's ship could be disabled with the contents of a standard maintenance kit. Elena's hands clasped behind her back, a gesture that looked relaxed but which Park knew meant she was thinking at maximum capacity. Ambassador, your assessment was certainly thorough, but I believe you may have overlooked something critical in your measurements. I assure you, Captain, our evaluation protocols are the result of millions of years of refinement across thousands of species. The temporal architects themselves verified our methodology across 17 different timeline branches. What could we possibly have missed? Elena moved to the center of the bridge, where the holographic star charts cast shifting patterns of light across her unremarkable human features. The Endeavour's crew, 23 humans representing the absolute pinnacle of their species' technological achievement, watched their captain face down a representative of a civilization that could casually rearrange solar systems. "Well, Ambassador," Elena said, and for the first time since the conversation began, she smiled. It was a distinctly human expression, a baring of teeth that somehow conveyed not aggression but a particular type of anticipation that the translation matrix couldn't quite capture. "You've measured our strength, our intelligence, our technology, our adaptability, our potential. You've catalogued our weaknesses with scientific precision." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the bridge like a held breath. "But tell me, in all your measurements, did you ever think to test what happens when you tell a human they can't do something?" Zexthara's crystalline form flickered with what might have been confusion. "I fail to see the relevance of such a measurement, Captain." Elena's smile widened, and suddenly the cramped bridge of the cobbled-together Endeavour felt less like a collection of salvaged parts and more like the bridge of a warship. "Would you like to find out?" The silence that followed was filled with the soft hum of barely functional alien technology and the quiet breathing of a crew that had just watched their captain declare war on the galaxy using nothing but a question and a smile. In the vast diplomatic cruiser, Ambassador Zexthara experienced something she hadn't felt in several centuries: uncertainty. There was something in the human captain's tone, in the way her primitive crew straightened at their stations, that didn't match any of the psychological profiles in their assessment. It was, she would later realize, the first measurement they should have taken. The emergency session of the Cosmic Council convened under circumstances that would have been unthinkable just 6 months earlier. The Great Chamber, usually filled with the confident murmur of civilizations discussing trade routes and territorial disputes, now echoed with something the galaxy hadn't heard in millennia: genuine fear. Ambassador Zexthara stood before the holographic displays that painted the chamber in harsh red light, each crimson dot representing a star system consumed by the Kethmoran swarm. The crystalline beings had emerged from the void between galaxies like a plague of living crystal, spreading across civilized space with methodical, inexorable hunger. 17 systems lost in the past cycle alone, General Vashtar of the Krillian hegemony reported. His massive 4-meter frame somehow diminished despite his natural armor plating gleaming under the emergency lighting. The Tertian colonies, the Spiral manufacturing complex, the entire Nexus defense grid, all consumed. They don't conquer, they don't negotiate. They simply devour. The holographic displays shifted to show battle footage that made even the galaxy's most hardened warriors flinch. Kethmoran drones, each the size of a cruiser and composed of living crystal that seemed to bend light around itself, tore through defensive fleets like tissue paper. Their hulls didn't just deflect weapons, they absorbed them, growing stronger with each attack. "Our strongest warriors cannot even scratch their hulls," Vashtar continued, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. The Krillian military had never encountered an enemy they couldn't simply overwhelm with raw force. Their carapaces adapt to any weapon within minutes. Plasma cannons, kinetic rounds, even our ancestral war claws. Nothing penetrates their defenses once they've analyzed the attack pattern. High Psion Merthala of the ethereal collective projected waves of controlled despair into the chamber. Her energy form, usually a brilliant white gold, had dimmed to a sickly yellow. "Our greatest telepaths cannot even perceive their consciousness. It's as if they exist in a completely different layer of reality." When Master Psion Velteron attempted a deep probe of their hive mind, the feedback left him catatonic for 3 cycles. She gestured, and the displays showed the aftermath of the Battle of Meridian Prime, an entire ethereal battle meditation fleet floating dead in space, their crystal matrix bodies shattered by psychic backlash. "They don't just resist mental influence," she continued. "They're completely invisible to psychic detection until they're already firing. Our precognitive abilities, our tactical prescience, our ability to coordinate fleet movements through telepathic link, all useless against an enemy that doesn't exist in the quantum consciousness field." Science Director Kelnash of the Zenithari Federation added his mechanical voice to the litany of failure. His quantum processors, usually operating at near-light speed, seemed sluggish as they processed the impossible data. Our most advanced weapons showed initial promise, he reported, holographic schematics displaying the Federation's pride, reality-warping quantum disruptors that could unmake matter at the subatomic level. For approximately 3.7 minutes, our dimensional phase cannons were effective against their hulls. Then they adapted. The displays showed the horrifying moment when Kethmoran ships began phasing through solid matter themselves, turning the Zenithari's own weapons against them. Their adaptation speed exceeds our computational models by several orders of magnitude. They don't just counter our weapons, they reverse engineer and improve upon them faster than our quantum computers can process the changes. It's as if they're operating with technology that exists outside our understanding of causality. The chamber fell silent except for the soft harmonics of various species' stress responses. Delegate after delegate reported the same story. Initial resistance, brief hope, then crushing defeat as the Kethmoran adapted to every strategy, every weapon, every tactic the galaxy's greatest civilizations could deploy. The refugee situation grows worse by the cycle, reported Coordinator Thex Mill of the Humanitarian Council. 47 billion beings displaced across 18 sectors. Our relief stations are overwhelmed. Entire species are going extinct not from direct attack, but from the chaos of evacuation. The holographic star map zoomed out, showing the true scope of the catastrophe. A growing red stain spread across the galactic spiral, consuming everything in its path. Trade routes that had existed for millions of years were severed. Civilizations that had endured since the galaxy's youth were fleeing in panic. Ambassador Zexthara manipulated the displays with trembling appendages. Strategic projections indicate total galactic consumption within 10 cycles if current expansion rates continue. The Kethmoran appear to be targeting not just inhabited systems, but the fundamental infrastructure of civilization itself, hyperspace beacons, communication networks, the quantum web that binds our societies together. Do we have any advantages? Asked Representative Moltvaya of the Aquarian depths, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with distress. Any weaknesses in their pattern? None that we've identified, Vashtar admitted with the bitter taste of defeat. They seem to have no need for resources we recognize, no vulnerabilities to exploit, no internal conflicts to exacerbate. They simply consume and expand, adapting to every resistance we offer. The silence stretched until it became painful. In the history of galactic civilization, there had never been a threat that the combined might of thousands of species couldn't overcome. But the Kethmoran represented something beyond their experience, an enemy that turned their greatest strengths against them. Are we truly so powerless? Zexthara asked, her harmonic voice carrying a desperation that transcended species boundaries. What have we overlooked? What strategy have we failed to consider? From the observer's gallery, the section reserved for protected species who were permitted to watch but not participate, a quiet voice spoke up. Perhaps it's time to ask the species you overlooked. Every sensor, optical organ, and energy field in the chamber turned toward the source of the voice. Captain Elena Rodriguez rose from her seat in the protected species section, her simple blue uniform looking almost absurdly plain among the energy beings and crystalline entities surrounding her. Captain Rodriguez, Zexthara's tone carried a mixture of desperate hope and reflexive dismissal. Surely you understand that your species, while admirable in its own way, lacks the capabilities to face this threat. We've measured every relevant parameter. Your people couldn't even damage a Kethmoran drone, let alone stop their advance. Elena walked down the steps toward the chamber floor, her soft footsteps somehow audible in the vast space. Around her, the greatest minds in galactic civilization, beings who could reshape matter with thought, process information faster than light, and manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, watched a representative of the weakest species in known space approach their council of war. Ambassador, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. You've measured our strength against the Kethmoran and found us wanting. You've measured our technology, our weapons, our defensive capabilities, and declared them insufficient. She reached the center of the chamber, standing beneath the holographic display of galactic destruction. But tell me, in all your calculations, Did you ever measure what happens when the weakest species in the galaxy has absolutely nothing left to lose? The question hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental order of the universe. Because that's exactly what you're about to find out. Elaborate, Ambassador Zexthera said, her crystalline structure flickering between hope and irritation like a malfunctioning star. The vast chamber had fallen silent except for the soft harmonics of various species' stress responses. A symphony of fear that hadn't been heard in galactic civilization for eons. Elena Rodriguez walked to the center of the chamber with deliberate steps, her soft-soled boots somehow audible despite the acoustic dampening fields. Around her, beings who could reshape reality with thought watched a representative of the galaxy's weakest species approach the holographic displays showing their collective doom. Honored delegates, Elena began, activating a small device from her uniform pocket. The chamber's air suddenly filled with three-dimensional tactical displays. Not the sleek, perfect projections of advanced galactic technology, but rough, flickering images that looked like they'd been cobbled together from spare parts and determination. While you've been throwing your greatest strengths against the Keth Moran's adaptive defenses, we've been doing something entirely different. The displays shifted to show human ships, not the impressive dreadnoughts of the major powers, but smaller, stranger vessels that looked like they'd been assembled by particularly creative scavengers. We've been learning. General Vashtar's massive frame leaned forward, his natural armor plates scraping against the crystalline floor. Captain, with respect, your species lacks the military capability to even reach Keth Moran space, let alone. That's exactly why we're the only ones who can stop them, Elena interrupted, her voice carrying across the chamber with unexpected authority. You measured our strength, but not our stubbornness. Our technology, but not our adaptability. Our weapons, but not our willingness to use them in ways that shouldn't work. The holographic displays shifted, showing grainy footage from human reconnaissance missions, impossible missions by galactic standards, where primitive vessels had somehow penetrated Keth Moran space and returned with intelligence. The Keth Moran adapt to patterns, Elena continued, manipulating the displays with practiced ease. Their entire evolutionary advantage is built on encountering a threat, analyzing it, and developing countermeasures. But what happens when they encounter something that has no pattern to analyze? High Psion Merthala projected confusion that rippled through the quantum consciousness field. All technology follows patterns, Captain. All tactics are based on logical principles. All weapons operate according to physical laws. Do they? Elena smiled, that distinctly human expression that still made translation matrices struggle. The displays shifted again, showing human engineering bays that looked like organized chaos given form. Technicians in environmental suits were stripping apart alien technology and rebuilding it in configurations that hurt to look at. This is the SS Lucky Break. Elena gestured to footage of a human destroyer that appeared to be held together by prayer and stubbornness. She's armed with inverted Valerian crystal resonators, backwards wired ethereal psychic amplifiers, and Zenithari quantum processors running software that shouldn't exist. Science Director Kelnash's mechanical appendages clicked rapidly in what his species called computational distress. Those combinations would create cascade failures. The power feedback alone would be catastrophic, yes, Elena agreed cheerfully. The Lucky Break has a 63% chance of exploding every time she fires her main weapons. But here's the thing, when she does fire, she hits with weapons that have never existed before and will never exist again. The displays showed test footage of the Lucky Break's weapon systems producing effects that made the assembled scientists' processing matrices overload. Energy beams that moved backwards through time, projectiles that achieved impact before being fired, defensive fields that protected targets by destroying them. Impossible, whispered Coordinator Thex Mill. Exactly, Elena's grin widened. Every human ship in our fleet carries different weapons. Not different models, different physics. We take your quantum disruptors and wire them backwards. We mount Krillian melee weapons on ethereal meditation crystals. We use Zenithari computers to run programs written by poets and philosophers instead of engineers. She paused, letting the implications sink in. The failure rate is enormous. 3 out of every 4 human vessels that engage the enemy are destroyed or disabled. But the Kethmoran can't adapt to our weapons because we're not trying to make them work properly. We're trying to make them fail in exactly the right way. Ambassador Zexthara's harmonic voice carried disbelief. You're describing technological chaos, Captain. Random failure cascades, unpredictable system interactions. Controlled chaos, Elena corrected. There's a difference. When you've been the weakest species in the galaxy for your entire existence, you get very good at making the impossible work just long enough to matter. The displays shifted to show combat footage that made every military mind in the chamber recoil. Human ships engaging Kethmoran drones in battles that looked less like warfare and more like performance art performed by suicidal engineers. Look at this engagement. Elena highlighted a section where a human frigate somehow managed to destroy a Kethmoran cruiser by weaponizing its own life support system. The ESS Determination jury-rigged her atmospheric processors to create a localized spacetime distortion. The ship suffocated her own crew to generate enough exotic matter to punch a hole through crystalline hull plating. Barbaric, General Vashtar rumbled. Effective, Elena countered. The Kethmoran spent 17 minutes trying to adapt to a weapon that was designed to self-destruct. By the time they figured out the pattern, there was no pattern left to analyze. She gestured to another section of footage. Here, the ESS Defiance used modified temporal architect chronometers to age her own ammunition during flight. The projectiles started as standard kinetic rounds but arrived as exotic matter that technically hadn't been invented yet. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. Science Director Kelnash's processors ran probability calculations that kept returning impossible results. The casualty rates, such tactics are mathematically unsustainable. Elena's expression grew serious. Maybe not sustainable, but we don't need to win forever. We just need to win long enough. She looked around at the assembled representatives. Beings who had dominated the galaxy through superior strength, intelligence, and technology, now facing an enemy that their superiority couldn't defeat. You measured every quantifiable advantage and found us lacking. But you forgot to measure the one thing that matters when everything else fails. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. You forgot to measure what happens when the weakest species in the galaxy has absolutely nothing left to lose and a really, really good reason to be angry. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility and terror in equal measure. We can't outfight them, outthink them, or outtech them, Elena continued. But we can out-crazy them. And sometimes that's enough. The first joint operation between human forces and the Galactic Fleet was scheduled to take place in the Tertian Nebula, where a Kethmoran scouting force had been detected probing the outer defensive perimeter. What followed would be studied by military academies for centuries, assuming any academies survived to study it. Admiral Elena Rodriguez stood in the command center of the hastily established Joint Operations Facility, watching as representatives from every major galactic power tried to make sense of human tactical displays. The facility itself was a testament to humanity's approach to warfare, built inside a hollowed-out asteroid using a combination of Xenothari quantum architecture, Valerian crystal resonance chambers, and human ingenuity that violated several laws of physics just by existing. I don't understand these ship configurations, General Vashtar growled, his massive claws clicking against the display interface as he tried to navigate the human tactical system. This vessel appears to have no primary weapons, no secondary weapons, and no defensive systems. What does it actually do? Lieutenant Commander Park looked up from his station, where he was somehow managing to coordinate 17 different species communication protocols through what appeared to be a coffee machine jury-rigged with quantum processors. That's the ESS Mayhem, sir. She's a specialized chaos generator. A what? She doesn't carry weapons in any traditional sense? Elena explained, manipulating the displays to show the Mayhem's internal structure. Instead, she's loaded with every piece of incompatible alien technology we could find. When she engages the enemy, she doesn't try to destroy them. She tries to become so unpredictable that their adaptation systems overload. Science Director Kelnash's mechanical appendages twitched in what his species called computational anxiety. Show me the power coupling for the main systems. The schematic that appeared made every engineer in the room recoil. Power flows that changed direction mid-circuit, energy loops that somehow generated more power than they consumed, and safety systems that appeared to be designed to cause controlled explosions. This configuration should be impossible, Kelnash stated flatly. The feedback loops alone would create cascading system failures within nanoseconds. They do, Captain Torres of the Mayhem confirmed cheerfully as she joined the briefing via hologram. Behind her, the ship's bridge was a maze of sparking consoles, flickering lights, and crew members who looked like they were having the time of their lives despite working in what amounted to a flying bomb. We get about 43 seconds of operational time before something catastrophically malfunctions. 43 seconds? High Psion Merthala projected disbelief so strongly that several empathic species in the room winced. How can you possibly accomplish anything meaningful in 43 seconds? Torres grinned, an expression that the universal translators had given up trying to convey accurately. Ma'am, you'd be amazed what humans can accomplish when they know they're about to die. The first wave of the operation launched exactly on schedule, which is to say it launched in complete chaos 20 minutes before the scheduled time because someone had accidentally set the chronometers to temporal architect standard instead of galactic standard, and the humans had decided to roll with it rather than waste time on corrections. 12 human vessels screamed toward the Keth Moran scouting force, their engines producing energy signatures that made sensor operators across 17 species question their equipment's reliability. The Keth Moran, for their part, began their standard adaptation protocols, analyzing the approaching threats and preparing countermeasures. They were completely unprepared for what actually happened. The ESS Lucky Strike opened the engagement by firing what appeared to be modified Valerian crystal resonators, but the resonance frequency was inverted, amplified through ethereal psychic crystals, and somehow channeled through the ship's coffee brewing system. The resulting energy beam defied several fundamental laws of physics and struck the lead Keth Moran vessel with force that should have been impossible to generate. The Keth Moran's adaptive shielding, designed to analyze and counter incoming energy patterns, attempted to process the incoming attack. For 3.7 seconds, their systems worked frantically to understand how a crystalline resonance weapon had been modified to fire liquid caffeine molecules accelerated to near-light speed. By the time they gave up trying to understand it, the Lucky Strike was already implementing Plan B. Power coupling failure in main systems, reported Chief Engineer Murphy over the comm, his voice carrying the particular comm that humans reserve for impending disasters. Switching to backup plan. Which backup plan? Torres asked. The one where we ram them. The Lucky Strike's crew had exactly 17 seconds to evacuate to escape pods before their ship, now effectively a guided missile powered by pure stubbornness, slammed into the Keth Moran vessel. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away and registered on sensors as a localized space-time distortion. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out with mathematical precision. The ESS Cosmic Joke lasted 43 seconds before her jury-rigged weapon systems achieved what her crew cheerfully called maximum entropy, a state where every system on the ship was failing in a different way simultaneously. Her final transmission was her captain reporting, "We're not sure what we just did, but the Keth Moran ship is spinning in 17 different directions at once." The ESS Defiance managed to weaponize her own life support system, creating a pocket of vacuum that somehow contained its own gravity field. The resulting gravitational anomaly pulled 2 Keth Moran vessels into a collision course while simultaneously aging them backwards through time until they reverted to raw materials. "This is insane," General Vashtar rumbled, watching the tactical displays with a mixture of horror and fascination. "These tactics have no basis in military doctrine, no strategic foundation, no." "Sir," interrupted Communications Officer Santos, "the ESS Mayhem is reporting. Well, I'm not sure how to translate this. She says she's achieved maximum wrongness and is requesting permission to see what happens when we divide by 0. Elena looked at the battlefield display, where human ships were dying in spectacular fashion while somehow taking Keth Moran vessels with them through methods that violated causality. "Permission granted. And tell Captain Torres we're all very proud of her." The Mayhem's final act was to attempt something that should have been impossible even by human standards. she tried to reverse the polarity of her own existence. The resulting paradox created a localized reality storm that convinced 3 Kethmoran ships they were actually furniture, and caused them to rearrange themselves into what observers later described as a particularly aggressive coffee table. When the battle was over, 9 of the 12 human vessels had been destroyed or disabled. But every single Kethmoran ship in the engagement had been eliminated, and their collective consciousness was experiencing something it had never felt before. Confusion so profound it bordered on existential crisis. "Casualty report," Elena requested quietly. 47 crew members lost, Park reported. But all escape pods were recovered. So actual personnel losses are 7 crew members who couldn't reach pods in time. And the enemy? Complete tactical victory, ma'am. Enemy scout force eliminated with 0 survivors. Elena nodded, studying the battlefield where debris from both fleets drifted in patterns that seemed to spell out rude words in several galactic languages. Analysis. Park consulted his readings. The Kethmoran adaptation systems attempted to counter our tactics for an average of 12 seconds before giving up and defaulting to random behavior. Their collective consciousness appears to be experiencing what our xenopsychologists are calling aggressive bewilderment. For the first time since the Kethmoran crisis began, something like hope flickered in the Joint Operations Center. Not because the victory had been easy, but because it had been impossible and humans had done it anyway. "Prepare the next wave," Elena ordered, "and make sure they're even more chaotic than the first." 3 standard cycles after the first human engagement, the Kethmoran swarm encountered something unprecedented in their million-year expansion across galaxies. Hesitation. The collective consciousness that had consumed entire star clusters with methodical precision found itself facing an enemy that defied every predictive model in their vast neural network. Deep within the hive mind's primary processing nexus, trillions of crystalline nodes attempted to analyze the growing collection of combat data from human encounters. Each engagement produced results that seemed to violate not just military doctrine, but fundamental laws of causality. In the Nexus binary system, a human cargo freighter designated ESS probability error had somehow convinced a Kethmoran dreadnought that mathematics was a matter of opinion. The ship's crew had jury-rigged ethereal meditation crystals with Zenithari quantum processors and human coffee brewing equipment, creating what their after-action report described as a localized field of aggressive philosophy. The Kethmoran vessel, upon being exposed to the field, had apparently concluded that the concept of existence was insufficiently peer-reviewed and had disassembled itself into component atoms while filing a formal complaint with the universe. "Impossible," the hive mind's primary consensus declared, analyzing the data for the 4007th time. "Matter cannot be convinced to cease existing through exposure to caffeinated beverages and meditation techniques." Yet the evidence was undeniable. The dreadnought was gone, its crew of 10,000 Kethmoran drones reduced to a cloud of confused atoms that kept trying to reassemble in the shape of philosophical questions. In the Vortex cluster, the human destroyer ESS Temporal Misconduct had used modified Zenithari time dilation fields in a way that made the universe's causality enforcement systems submit a formal complaint. The ship had somehow aged its own weapons mid-flight, causing them to arrive at their targets before they were fired, which had convinced the Kethmoran defense grid that the battle was already over and they had lost. "The humans appear to be weaponizing paradox itself," reported subconsensus node 47,292. "Their tactics create localized violations of logical consistency that spread through our analysis networks like a virus." The hive mind's response was swift and decisive. Deploy additional analytical resources. Surely, with enough processing power, any pattern could be understood, any strategy could be countered. They were catastrophically wrong. The Battle of Spiral Prime demonstrated the full horror of human tactical doctrine unleashed without restraint. Admiral Elena Rodriguez had personally led a fleet of 37 vessels, each one a masterpiece of organized chaos that made the previous engagements look like carefully planned military exercises. Her flagship, the ESS Indomitable, had been deliberately damaged before the battle began. Hull breaches were held closed with emergency patches that were designed to fail at specific intervals. The weapons systems had been sabotaged by their own crews. The navigation computer was running poetry analysis software instead of tactical programs. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender offers from 17 different Kethmoran vessels," reported Communications Officer Santos, somehow managing to sound professional while sparks showered around her from an overloading console. "They're asking if they can please go home now." "Denied," Elena replied cheerfully, watching as her ship's main cannon fired a salvo that technically shouldn't exist. "Tell them this is for their own good." The Indomitable's weapons had been modified beyond all recognition. Her main guns fired concentrated stupidity, actual, weaponized ignorance that had been extracted from failed political campaigns and refined through exposure to bureaucratic efficiency reports. When the beams struck Kethmoran hulls, the ship's adaptive systems tried to understand what they were being hit with and promptly forgot how to maintain structural integrity. "Ma'am, the ESS Confusion is reporting that they've successfully divided by zero," Park announced from his station, which appeared to be held together by duct tape and determination. "The resulting mathematical impossibility has created a reality bubble where the Kethmoran think they're actually quite pleasant crystalline beings who would like to open a flower shop." "Outstanding. Tell them to gift wrap the enemy fleet and send it to the Kethmoran home worlds with a card that says, 'Learn to play nice.'" Across the battlefield, similar impossibilities played out with mathematical precision. The ESS logical fallacy had convinced 3 Kethmoran cruisers that they were actually interpretive dance performances, causing them to begin a synchronized routine that ended with them flying into a nearby star while attempting to express the concept of melancholy. The ESS bootstrap paradox had somehow fired at itself from the future, creating a temporal loop where the enemy fleet was destroyed by ammunition that hadn't been manufactured yet. But perhaps the most devastating weapon in the human arsenal was the ESS recursive definition, which had achieved something that made even experienced human crews question their sanity. The ship had somehow convinced the Kethmoran hive mind that the concept of adaptation was itself an adaptation to the concept of adaptation, creating an infinite loop that caused 17 Kethmoran vessels to spend the rest of the battle trying to adapt to their own ability to adapt. "Status report on the enemy collective consciousness," Elena requested, watching as a Kethmoran dreadnought attempted to surrender to its own shadow. "Showing signs of severe existential distress, ma'am," reported Chief Science Officer Williams, consulting readings from instruments that probably shouldn't have been physically possible. "Their primary processing nodes are experiencing what our xenopsychologists are calling aggressive confusion with a side order of philosophical despair. The Kethmoran collective consciousness, faced with enemies that turned their greatest strength, their ability to adapt, into a liability, began to experience something that their species had never encountered in a million years of conquest. Doubt. Perhaps, suggested a minority subconsensus that was quickly overruled. We should consider that some enemies are not meant to be understood. Impossible, the primary consensus responded. All phenomena can be analyzed. All patterns can be determined. All. The thought was interrupted by reports from the front lines, where a human ship had apparently weaponized the concept of maybe and was using it to convince Kethmoran vessels that they might not actually exist. For the first time in their evolutionary history, the Kethmoran swarm began to consider the possibility that there were some battles that could not be won through adaptation and analysis. And in the depths of their collective consciousness, something unprecedented began to grow, the suspicion that the universe might be fundamentally more chaotic than they had ever imagined. Orders from the primary collective announced the hive mind's command structure. All forward elements are to withdraw to safe distance for strategic reassessment. It was the first time in a million years that the Kethmoran had retreated from anything. But then again, they had never encountered humans before. Admiral Rodriguez, watching the enemy fleet flee in patterns that seemed to spell out, "Please make it stop," in 17 different languages, allowed herself a small smile. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Pursuit course. And someone please tell engineering to make our next weapons even more confusing." In the depths of space, the Kethmoran swarm fled toward the galactic rim, their collective consciousness trying desperately to process the impossible truth they had learned. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one that refuses to make sense.